Hey everyone. Okay, so this is going to be the first of three videos that are about pages 1 through 25 in our textbook. I think I want to give a little bit more detail, especially on the first couple of weeks of readings at least, to make sure that you're up to speed on this perspective that you want to adopt, and just generally like what you're doing when you're practicing a kind of rhetorical mode of communication. And I think depending on your background with rhetoric, pages 1 through 25 are, a little bit difficult at times. So, as I said, this is going to be the first of three videos because what I'm actually going to do is in this first video, do an overview and then focus on pages 1 through 8. In the second video, I'm going to focus on pages 8 through 18, and then I'll finish up the last of the pages to 25 in a third video. And I'm trying to get better at these videos, so I'm sorry if this is a little bit long for what you're used to. I will try and be quick. One last kind of preamble-y thing. Tomorrow, Thursday and Tuesdays and Thursdays throughout our summer session from 10 to 11 a.m., I'll be ready and around on Zoom or phone or email to answer any questions you have about the reading, about assignments, anything like that. So take advantage of that time to get in touch with me. So for example, if the videos related to what you have to do in chapter 1 just aren't as fulfilling as you want them to be, then just get in touch with me and let me know how I can help. Okay, so let's talk about pages 1 through 8 from the reading that you have due in chapter 1. And the way I look at it, it kind of breaks down into three sections. There's an intro part that goes to page 6. There's a very short section, pages 6 to 7, on ancient rhetorics, the beginnings. And then there's a section that begins on 7 with a subsection on ancient and contemporary rhetorics. So here's everything I wanted to say about the first 8 pages. First of all, Crowley and Haughey do, I think, a pretty good job of explaining that rhetoric tends to be thought of as a kind of an empty way of communication, something we do when we are being deceptive or manipulative, Machiavellian, you could even say. In other words, rhetoric is just not a good thing. It's a bad thing. I mean, to call someone rhetorical, to say you're being rhetorical, is generally considered an insult. But this really isn't what rhetoric is, and there's a lot of history that I could introduce, could talk to you about at some point if you're interested in just like when things turned, but historically. But rhetoric was not always like this. And a good way to understand what rhetoric was in a more kind of positive light is to begin with something that Crowley and Haughey focus on. I'm just going to delve into a little bit more than they do even. Which is to begin from the assumption that our public lives are based on the need to negotiate differences among each other. In other words, we begin from the assumption, if we're going to appreciate what rhetoric does for us, we begin from the assumption that at the origins of culture, society, our public lives, it's difference that defines us and that paradoxically brings us together. Let's just think about this for a second. Each of us, each of you, are different. We're born in different times, in different hospitals, or if even in the same hospital at different times, to different parents, who have different family histories. We're different because of gender and sex and sexual orientation, whether we're abled or disabled, because of race and economic class, the languages that we speak or don't, the dialects and accents that we express, our past experiences, our career goals and ambitions. We don't even begin and end in the same place with interests and hopes and desires. So there's just so many different variations on that, and each one of us is going to have a slightly different version of it. Difference is really where we start, where we spend our lives and where we end them. Learning how to reconcile enough of those differences in order to live and work together, to coexist, is a challenge. And it is in that persistent dynamic of difference that rhetoric has a positive and essential place among the arts of communication. Rhetoric is not seeking truth. at least not first and foremost, as you might find in the sciences. Rather, rhetoric is about finding the available arguments suited to a given situation, as Crowley and Haughey explain on page 1. So, rhetoric is about understanding what kinds of arguments, what kinds of uses of language would work well with an audience who represents a different perspective than yours in order to create change. So how do I get someone who has different thoughts and feelings and abilities than I to agree with me, to work with me, to be moved by my words in ways that lead to change? And those are the kinds of questions that really define where rhetoric begins and why it's so important. But as Crowley and Haughey explain, we have kind of forgotten how to argue, how to work through our differences. What we get on TV and social media, especially in the last 20 years, is something more like food fights, without much of an interest in or understanding of how to work across and through difference. Traditionally, rhetoric is about how to understand someone else, someone who is different from us, and determine the best ways in which to engage them through language to change the way they might think or feel or act. But today it seems like what passes for rhetoric is really just screaming from our siloed perspectives. And by the way, social media tends to reinforce that devolution. The algorithms that define the relationships on platforms like Facebook are designed to silo us, to reduce our group of friends to those with similar interests. I don't know if you noticed this, but you could have 500 friends, but the friends who show up in your feed are going to be a very small sampling, and they tend to be people who are basically thinking and feeling and doing a lot of the same things as you at that given moment. And you see this also in e-commerce and everything else. It's almost like a noose that gets tightened. What social media does brilliantly, but also in a way that feeds an inability for us to communicate across difference, is a narrowing down of our interests. Sorry, it's not like I'm choking you. So to me, pages 1 through 8, Crowley and Haughey are really trying to explain to you what rhetoric it is, what it isn't, and that it really kind of starts in difference and what that means. And videos 2 and 3, I'll delve into a little bit of that, but from the kinds of perspectives that they're trying to set up in the later sections. So hopefully that helped. Bye.